Today we're doing a tier list for every Dragon Ball arc. Yes, every arc, including Super, but not GT.
Don't you tell me that it wasn't meant to be. Call it quits, call it destiny.
Okay, fine, I'll do GT. Let's start from where it all began. Search for the Dragon Balls, otherwise known as the Emperor Pilaf arc. This is a weird one to start this video off with. It is the starting point of the franchise, and it does feel like Dragon Ball, but this is clearly a growing period for the franchise, episodic in nature with a much stronger focus on adventure over combat. Despite combat being present, the comedic nature of this short adventure feels distinctly different to everything that will come afterwards. With that said, it plays host to some of the most oft flashback to moments in the series, like Roshi and Bulma's introductions, Goku versus Yamcha, and, of course, Goku's very first Kamehameha. There's humor, some weird creative choices that are extra spicy looking back at them today, but overall, it still retains a lot of the charm that made it famous. It's not my favorite arc by any means, but it does deliver some nice twists at the end with the discovery of Goku's great ape power, connecting it back to his grandpa Gohan's death alluded to at the very beginning. All in all, a decent start to the series. I'll give this one a B. Next up, the 21st Tenkaichi Budokai. Now we're talking. This is, unironically, one of my favorite arcs of all time, and I cannot believe more people don't talk about it. A while back, I decided to review the original series, and even then I was blown away by how powerful the messaging and execution of what was, at the time, a big change in tone and direction for the series into the realms of battle manga. Looking back now from the present day, with the likes of gods and intergalactic brawls that can destroy galaxies being the order of the day, this feels much more quaint and measured in comparison, and to be honest, I love that about this. While it's much more modest and simple, these aspects of the story are absolutely strengths, focusing on and effectively delivering upon the themes and fostering of the next generation and pushing your limits perhaps more effectively than any other arc that would come later. The battle between Roshi and Goku is phenomenal, and to this day, it's one of the arcs I turn to revisit whenever I'm hankering for some good paneling, classic Dragon Ball action, and some good old-fashioned storytelling. This is an easy S tier. And next up is the Red Ribbon Army. Here's where we start running into our first problem in this video. What some people consider an arc, others don't. And with regards to the Red Ribbon Army arc, you can further subdivide it into pieces or look at it as a whole. I'm doing the latter because screw doing it the other way. Mr. Fusion brought up a great point in the emotional throughline of this arc being that of Goku using the Dragon Balls to bring back Appa's dad, so naturally the endpoint of this arc for me is with the Uranai Baba tournament where both of these throughlines get satisfied, which honestly raises this arc in my estimation. I personally loved that tournament, particularly through its ending with Goku getting to reunite with his grandpa Gohan for the first and last time in the series. It's touching, and it's still to this day one of the only two moments in this entire series that's made me tear up slightly. I know this arc might feel boring to some, and on the flip side might be some others' favorites, but for me it lands somewhere in A tier. There's a lot of adventure and fun in this arc with some crazy characters like Mercenary Tao Pai Pai. He has some real psycho energy in this story, and the way he travels around is so Toriyama it hurts. Next up, the 22nd Tenkaichi Budokai. The 22nd Tenkaichi Budokai, while it might be the weakest of the three tournaments in early Dragon Ball, it's still an early Dragon Ball tournament arc and thus is an easy A-tier contender. The fundamentals are all there for a great story concerning manipulation, staying true to yourself, and of course, my soft spot fostering the next generation. The three main tournament arcs in early Dragon Ball, when viewed through the lens of Master Roshi, tell the story of a grizzled vet looking on, hoping, praying, and doing everything in his power to ensure that long after he's gone, there will exist someone better than he to look after the Earth. And it's in this tournament we really get to experience that, as for the very first time for us, Roshi loses, opting to leap out of bounds in his match against Ten Shinhan for his own good, proving to Ten Shinhan in that moment that winning isn't what's important to Roshi, but everything else that comes afterwards. Furthermore, the matchups in this tournament are awesome too, with the likes of Roshi versus Tenshinhan, of course, Goku versus Krillin, and naturally, the final matchup, Goku versus Tenshinhan, with Tenshinhan's very soul on the line, and with there existing the possibility that this could be the very first time Goku could win a tournament. It's an edge of your seat affair, and I just loved it. I'm sort of on the fence with this one. Should I put it in S tier, or should I leave it with A? The first tournament I still feel is a little better, I think, but only by a fraction. Still, it's enough to push this to A tier, I think. King Piccolo arc. The King Piccolo arc, on the other hand, is an arc that I don't think I share a lot in common with the rest of the Dragon Ball fanbase, given I found it difficult to get past a few hiccups I saw the story to have. But let's talk about some of the good points first, because in reality, there's a lot to like here, and I do want to give this arc its fair due. Its ending ushers in, of course, an iconic battle between Goku and King Piccolo himself, with a level of seriousness to it the likes of which we had never seen before from Goku, which is appropriate as this is Goku in his teenage years and the last time we'll see him as a child before becoming a fully fledged adult. And not to mention boasts one of the coolest defeat moments for a main villain. Furthermore, I love the connection at the end Goku receives to the heavens with God. And on top of that, yet again, upon rereading, I was blown away by how great Goku's first interaction with Yajirobe actually was, and I love how filled with anger Goku became when Krillin dies in the story's opening moments. It's tragic and horrific to see, particularly off the back of what was a great and respectful contest between Goku and Tenshinhan in the finish during the last arc. But I do have some gripes with this arc, as I mentioned, so let's explore those. While it has elements that are great, to me it felt as though they were cobbled together by tenuous plot beats that existed solely to move the story along, despite them not actually making all that much narrative sense in the first place. The first defeat Goku receives soundly at the hands of King Piccolo is great, but King Piccolo only leaves the scene when he recognizes that Goku's heart has stopped. And once he leaves, Goku's heart coincidentally just turns back on. We'll call that contrivance number 1, okay? That's contrivance number 1. Contrivance number 2 comes by way of Goku being in the company of the only person who could carry him to safety, and not just that, manage also to climb Korin Tower. Goku was the first to climb the tower in God knows how long. I mean, that's what made that specific achievement so special. But now, because the plot demands it, Yajirobe can do it too? That's convenience or contrivance number 2, okay? That's contrivance number 2. Contrivance number 3, once up there, the lesson Goku received from Korin in that Keep Away game now is flipped on its head with no real message apart from, I guess he took a big risk by drinking the special water to make him stronger. Cool. And now gets a free power boost to allow him to defeat King Piccolo. There's no lesson, there's no story arc really to speak of that's meaningful outside of Roshi coming to realize that his time as the Earth's defender has come to an end. And he doesn't even really play a large enough role to carry the story this time around. It's a real shame. This arc has a lot to offer, and while I still think it leaves a lot to be desired, it's still the blueprint for villain-centered arcs that would be later perfected as the series soldiered on into Dragon Ball Z. With that said, I just can't put it anywhere higher than a B tier personally. But that's okay, because the next arc marks what I believe to be the beginning of the single best run in all of Dragon Ball. And that run begins at the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai. I think at this point it should go without saying that I am something of a super fan for these early Dragon Ball tournament arcs. With the first acting as one of my favorites in the series, this, the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai, might actually be my favorite arc of all time, alongside 2 others I'm sure many of you could guess. To me, this arc marks the beginning of my favorite stretch in Dragon Ball's long and winding story, and I think, for this arc, we gotta dust off that God tier once again, because man, this is a God tier level entrant if ever I did see one. Almost every single fight in this tournament is an absolute banger. And I'm serious, like all of them. Tenshinhan versus his former mentor Tao, the adorable Chi-Chi versus Goku fight, Krillin versus Piccolo, and Yamcha versus Shen, offering Yamcha perhaps his best moment in the original run, despite him still losing, and those are just the quarter-final matchups. It's got a rematch between Tien and Goku, and of course, we have Goku versus Piccolo in the finals, the likes of which I cannot believe there are still folks out there that have watched and loved Dragon Ball Z and still haven't seen this one, because This is the part of early Dragon Ball that really started to feel like Z for me, and this final fight specifically is better than so many of those great fights we get in Z to boot. It's incredible, offers so much in the way of choreography, so much so that later fights borrow from this very fight itself. I could talk about this arc honestly for the next half an hour, and I have done on my channel, so if you want to know my thoughts on every aspect of this arc in detail, you can go there. But for the sake of brevity, I will be placing this in a new category called God Tier. Now it's time to march onward to Dragon Ball Z, starting things off with the very first arc of Z, entitled the Saiyan arc. Now, oddly enough, given that I'm a reviewer and love Dragon Ball, it might surprise many of you to know that I've reviewed every single part of Dragon Ball, including GT, except for the series' most popular section, Dragon Ball Z. And since I have every intention to one day review these arcs in detail, I will be sharing with you all my ratings for these arcs now. However, I will try to keep them brief. This is a tier list after all, and we have a lot more to get through after Z concludes. Alright, so the Saiyan arc. This was the arc that literally started it all for me. Way back when I was a little kid, I got to see Goku vs. Vegeta, and to this day, it is still my favorite fight in all of the series, and maybe even all of anime. It's an arc that kicks off with a change that takes a story from the limitations of Earth to the broad expanse of the greater universe. It kills Goku in its opening chapters. I mean, that never happened before, and the journey to and training with King Kai remains to this day one of my most treasured moments in the series. This arc is top to bottom brilliant, and I can't wait to one day explain in greater detail why this is my opinion. But for now, we're putting this in God tier. The Frieza arc. The Frieza arc is another incredible contender for this tier list, and one that's catapulted my imagination into the stratosphere. I will say right now that I am including the Namek portion of this tale in this arc too, meaning the cat and mouse games that made our first trip outside the confines of Earth all the more thrilling and enjoyable are also included in this arc. It also has a moment that legitimately scared me to my very core as a kid when Brian Drummond's Vegeta screamed in anger after he discovered Gohan stole his Dragon Ball.
I'll get you for this! You won't escape my wrath!
Hearing that voice, that anger, my soul would leave my body. And furthermore, it elevated the intimidation that Vegeta represented in the story, which again was leveraged brilliantly from that point on through encounters with the Ginyu Force that served to elevate Goku far beyond what we ever expected from him. And then there's the Frieza fight, which offered Gohan a number of occasions to be badass, and of course, Vegeta's death and Goku's ultimate fight with Frieza, which also provided, for me, my favorite Goku moment in the series. And it's not the Super Saiyan transformation, it's the Kaioken times 20. Acting as one last hopeless struggle to maybe touch the untouchable god Frieza had built himself up to be. The ending to this struggle is perfect, and I totally 100% plan on going and diving into this in greater detail another day. But for now, again, this is another god tier entry. Next up, the Garlic Jr. arc. Okay, look, I know this arc isn't canon, but I included it for funsies, okay? Sue me. Whenever the series would pop on my TV screen and the Frieza arc would end, I'd eagerly await the return of Goku in his little space pod, only to, time and again, get faked out by this weird zombie vampire mini arc featuring Gohan, Krillin, and Piccolo. Truth be told, the concept behind this little story isn't all that bad and actually has a few scenes that I remember vividly, like the gang turning into weird vampire zombies by the Blackwater Mist and of course, Kami and Popo running in the depths of the Lookout. It adds a bit of color and fun to the world of the Lookout too, but to be honest, that's where my compliments end. It's at the end of the day a needless detour with no consequence for the main plot and adds nothing of serious value. The action is lacking Toriyama's touch and overall was never a story I wanted to revisit in this series. This is our first C tier entry, totally met in hindsight. And now we're on to what everyone's been waiting for, the Cell arc. Now we're back to cooking with gas. With the Cell arc comprising everything concerning Frieza's surprise return with Trunks' reveal, the android's material, and of course the big green handsome man of the hour, Cell. This arc is pretty nuts, and not always in the best of ways, but boy does it introduce some imagination capturing mechanics and stick a landing so incredible we are still talking about it all these years later. For me, I look at this more like an epilogue to what was, in my opinion, the greatest stretch in the original run. From the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai all the way to Cell, you have for yourself this brilliant story of how how Goku assumed responsibility for Earth, all the while learning that not everyone can be reasoned with. Furthermore, Goku's son gets introduced during the Saiyan arc, and within that epic conclusion to this arc against Cell, we get a thrilling and immensely satisfying conclusion to that story also. It does have some really obvious issues that I have to draw attention to for the sake of honesty though. The fact Toriyama had editors in his ear telling him that the main arc villains weren't good enough is clear for all to see. As we shift focus from Jiroa 19 to 17 and 18, and eventually to Cell, who cycles through a bunch of different forms before landing on one they all liked. It can be a little distracting, but getting to see the unveiling of Trunks, the return of Goku and Vegeta, and as I mentioned, that awesome conclusion during the Cell games, it more than makes up for those shortcomings narratively. It's not God tier for me, but it's definitely the top of S tier. It's a terrific arc. And now we're moving on to the final arc of Z, the Buu arc.
What?
Now I bet everyone is waiting for me to tear this arc a new one, but to be honest, I don't hate this arc. I just think it's the weakest of Z's run. I made a video discussing this arc's shortcomings before, so if you want to take a look at that video, you can. But truth be told, despite the arc having a lot of weird padding for lack of a better term, it's filled with so many iconic mechanics and stuff from the series that have lasted the test of time, it's difficult to hate it too much. Super Saiyan 3 is awesome, and who wouldn't get that satisfying feeling watching Vegeta do what no one else could do effortlessly? It's an empowerment fantasy in the best of ways. Also, when I was a kid, I will admit I totally tried to do that thing Gohan told Videl to do with her chi so that she could fly. Yeah, okay, I was that kid that believed he could fly, and you know what else? I also tried to do the Kamehameha. My childhood was awesome. Jokes aside though, when I was playing sports growing up, and I needed a small boost, Kaioken really did do the trick, and I even tried revisiting that little mental trick a few months ago when I ran my very first marathon in June. And it did give me a boost at mile 20, though I did pay for it later. Totally true to the Kaioken mechanic, what can I say? While the Buu arc itself does suffer from a major course correction and a lack of direction during many instances, it boasts some of the most emotional and epic clashes in the series too. I don't think it's as good as all the other ones, but it's definitely not the worst from the original series. I'll give this one an A. And that brings us to the end of the original series and to the end of me being upbeat and happy. It's time to dive into the misery as we enter the post-OG series material with 1996's Dragon Ball GT. The GT stands for good television. Just kidding. Just kidding. It doesn't. It stands for garbage TV. I lied. The Black Star Dragon Ball arc. F tier. Please refer to my review I made a few years ago. My opinion hasn't really changed, only sadness and hatred remains. And look, I think, or at least I hope, that a lot of you out there at this point can appreciate that on some level, perhaps differently from you, I adore this story. I love Dragon Ball, I love how it's made me feel throughout my life, and heck, a minute ago I even admitted to channeling the power of the Kaioken in the middle of a distance race when I was 30 years old. But I think it's because this story means so much to me that when I see it go so far away from what I loved about it, I can't help but react in a, let's say, a displeased manner concerning what I've just seen. Enter the Black Star Dragon Ball arc. Many of you, if you're from America, might not have even seen this arc because it was cut and all of you guys basically got the start from the baby arc instead. A much better arc than this. I wrote a comprehensive review of my first time watching this series in completion, and this arc in particular was worse than I remembered. Instead of building off of the material Dragon Ball had left us with in the original series, it violently changed the tone of the narrative without any transitional period, creating scenarios with no through line anyone over the age of 4 could get behind, and more often than not left me wanting and yearning for a story I'd ultimately never receive. Keeping also in mind that much like the original series, I too grew up with this show. So this isn't the case of me being cynical in my older age either. Overall, this arc is just a mess, aimless in its direction, and offered absolutely nothing I could latch onto and enjoy personally. By far the worst arc on this list. It does have a great theme song though, but that alone cannot save it from my wrath here. Time to dust off F tier, truly awful. The baby arc. Okay, this arc wasn't awful. Not even close to being awful really, and honestly, was the arc Goku and the gang should have opened with in this new series. I'm definitely not the first person to mention this, but there are some truly interesting and exciting ideas and concepts at play here. And I'm not talking about Super Saiyan 4. The idea of creating a physical manifestation of the Saiyans' hatred and chaos in the likes of the parasitic life form known as Baby offers not just interesting visual possibilities and hijinks with tension built in, but it has something the arc prior didn't. a through line that connects it to the earlier material. Thematically, I love the idea of Baby being created to get revenge for what the Saiyans did, only to become what it was designed to destroy. A monster attacking a new world. It's a simple idea, but a powerful one, and it's easily the arc's strongest aspect, I think. Furthermore, I love what this arc did for Goten. When I first saw this, I legitimately laughed out loud. It's such a fun idea for the character to give him this lady killer persona. However, I do have issues with this arc too. The first half of the story is interesting, watching as Baby infiltrates the gang's group. However, once that point passes and the main set pieces fall into place, the narrative doesn't feel like it has much else to offer and sort of meanders a bit until the fight at the end. The interesting fights that interwove narrative tension are replaced by just plain old fighting that honestly feels more like an obligation than a tangible part of the narrative, and has an ending with a giant golden monkey fight that I genuinely did not enjoy even in the slightest. Baby has its problems for me, but I will say that it has more good than bad and is comfortably the best arc in Dragon Ball GT for me. Overall, I think I'll give this one a B for Baby. Super Android 17 arc. One step forward with Baby, and now 20 steps back with Super Android 17. God, I did not like this arc when I watched it last. And I still don't. This has one of the loosest excuses for a story I've ever seen. The plot is cobbled together by tenuous at best plot elements and, at worst, totally nonsensical choices. The fighting is immeasurably boring, and I couldn't care less about the main villain either if I tried. It's cool that Piccolo is in this, but even with that, this still manages to suck beyond belief. Its only saving grace is that it's short. So, its biggest upside, for me at least, is that it ends faster than the other arcs. Brilliant! I'm not spending more time on this than I need to. F tier, moving on. The Shadow Dragons arc. The final arc of Dragon Ball GT's one-year run, capping things off in 1997 with its Shadow Dragons arc. An arc that, again, everyone might say has an interesting plot concept, and it does. However, the execution manages to turn that into something much more boring than it otherwise has any right to be. I will, however, say that while it is boring in many aspects, it does have some upsides. The Spirit Bomb Goku charges at the end is awesome and up there with the best Spirit Bombs in the series. It offers some of the most memorable Dragon Ball GT action, despite that not meaning much in hindsight, and it has, by far, its greatest achievement, an ending deserving of Dragon Ball. That will always bring a tear to my eye. But, and this is a massive badonkey-donk, the ending to Dragon Ball GT doesn't really have much to do with the arc itself. In theory, the gang have over-relied on the Dragon Balls all throughout the series, and so if you tack this ending onto the end of any of the other arcs from the past, it works just as well as it does at the end of this one. It, for that reason, feels disconnected in many ways, and it also feels strange to consider it part of the Shadow Dragons arc for me. Good as it is, it feels like an ending that was conceived of independent of the arc itself, and to be honest, given it has little connective tissue to the main story, I think that very well could be the case. As an arc, as a story, the Shadow Dragons arc is interesting and far less bad than the likes of the Black Star Dragon Balls and Super Android 17, but it's still nowhere near good in terms of storytelling for me personally. With that said, I'm going to slot this Shadow Dragons arc into D tier. And with that, it's time for a time skip. Not in the narrative of the story though, but in real life. Remember that? Remember real life? Me neither. Time for Dragon Ball Super. Dragon Ball Super, kicking off right after the release of the impressively mediocre Resurrection F film, the powers that be behind Dragon Ball Super's creation saw fit to recap not one, but two films in significantly lower quality with little to no extra content worth exploring. Let's see how I thought that went. The Battle of Gods arc. I don't think a single show has given me more whiplash than this right here. When I heard that Dragon Ball was returning for the very first time since I was a little kid, I legit got chills, I'm sure, like many of you, and readied my body for the awesomeness I was anticipating to commence. When I found out that they were recapping a film that came out 2 years prior, I was disappointed, and then I saw this face. Yeah. That became the face of Dragon Ball Super for me. I was destroyed. And look, it's not like there's anything necessarily wrong with this story, but there's nothing really in this arc that's done better than the film itself. I suppose I liked in theory the notion of extending the fights to match the runtimes of the Z fights, but there was nothing of substance really added. There's an entire episode where Goku and Beerus literally threaten to punch the universe in half, and it's by far one of the dumbest things I think I've ever seen in this show, and I've seen some dumb things in this show. Overall, I'm flirting with the idea of putting this in C tier, but the animation is just so bad I have to put it into D tier. The The Resurrection F arc. Resurrection F, on the other hand, was a film I thought left a lot to be desired. However, what they did add to this, while it's better than what Battle of Gods offered, nothing new, outside of Goku and Vegeta's training episode, which I still like, this is still a massive step backwards in every conceivable way. Managing to make a film I already didn't like even worse by tanking the animation more than I had ever seen in the prior arc, while also being in and of itself a pointless retread. It's worse than Battle of Gods, but I'm still D tier. The Universe 6 Tournament Arc. I was hyped to see this arc. I was hyped to finally see some new stuff from Dragon Ball that wasn't a retread of the older films. The ending itself is flashy and fun, but I'm gonna call a spade here, and this might be controversial, but I thought this arc was boring. With that said, however, it is still nowhere near as bad as the prior two arcs and offered up something new at the very least for us to enjoy. I like some of the fights, or well, I should say I enjoyed part of some of the fights. I liked the theme behind Vegeta vs. Kaba, although the action felt a bit limited. I liked the Super Saiyan transformation part of Goku vs. Frost, and I liked Goku vs. Hit. I think my favorite part of this was, funnily enough, not the Kaioken, though I did like that a lot, but I found myself having more fun with Goku finding his footing against Hit himself in the early stages of the contest. There's a lot of fights in this, but overall I think it's the weakest tournament arc in all of Dragon Ball. It's not bad, but it's not great either. It's a really middle of the pack type arc, so I think I'm going to put it in C tier. The Jelly Vegeta arc.
Come on! God damn it! You got me shitting me!
Wait, I forgot the other world tournament. I forgot to include that in this video. Okay. If you're counting that as a tournament arc, that's worse than this one. So if I'm putting this in C tier, I'll put the Otherworld tournament in D tier? Yeah, I didn't like that tournament. Speaking of not great, let's talk about the disaster that was Jelly Vegeta. Truth be told, I know that's not the name of this arc, but it's the one that literally everyone online uses, and so for the purposes of this video, and fuck it, henceforward, that's the official name I hereby decree. The arc itself is super short, feels totally pointless, and feels like it incorporates the likes of Goten and Trunks more out of pity than any other reason. They're just not using the story. Much the same way I included Garlic Jr. for the lulz, I'm throwing this one down in F tier because I found it so annoying to endure. I will say though that Brian Drummond coming back as the voice of Jelita was a really nice touch in the English dub, so there's that.
I'm black, y'all, and I'm black, y'all, and I'm blacker than black, and I'm black, y'all, and I'm blickety black, blacker than black, I'm blacker than black, yo, because I'm black, and I'm...
You know what's funny about Dragon Ball Super? It started off in the worst of ways, but managed to crawl back from the abyss and deliver a better arc each and every time it released one. Think about it. The first two arcs were AIDS, the Universe 6 arc was okay if not boring, and now we have Goku Black, otherwise known as the Future Trunks arc. Not bad! A train wreck of an ending, but otherwise not bad. Well, that's perhaps being a little too generous. I've gone on the record and stated numerous times that this arc feels like there's a lot of padding, and that more importantly, the logic of the mechanics in this story don't actually make any sense when you sit down and think about it. And the writers knew that, I think. Aside from having the worst ending in the series, I think there's a lot to like about this arc, and it managed to deliver one of the most iconic characters to stem from Super's 3-year run, Goku Black himself. Furthermore, there are interesting conversations on topics that are being contended with here between right and wrong, moral superiority, and different ethical dilemmas, many of which are glossed over and not dealt with, but while we're flirting with answering these questions in the middle of the story, it's interesting at the very least. The action in this is easily the best in the series thus far, and even managed to bring some fans back that otherwise gave up on the show after Animation Gate in 2015. Choosing where to place this is difficult, but at the end of the day, I think it's better than Universe 6 by a wide margin, but nowhere near as good as the 22nd Tenkaichi Budokai, so I guess plopping it in B tier is acceptable for me. The Universe Survival Arc. For those curious, by the way, of my comprehensive thoughts concerning this arc as well as all the other super arcs, I made a series a couple of years ago where I go through everything, and my feelings are pretty much the same now as they were back then, so check it out if you're curious. With that said, I probably will sound a lot more positive in those reviews than I do here, where I'm comparing everything from Super to the very best from the original run. And with that out of the way, let's talk about the anime's conclusion with the Universe Survival Arc and the Tournament of Power itself. Some people love this, some people hate this arc with a burning hot passion. Personally, I find myself landing close to the middle, maybe leaning a bit more to the side of enjoying it. All things being equal though, I think this arc is much better than Goku Black. However, I think Goku Black is a much better antagonist when compared to the likes of Jiren. And before I hear in the comments, oh, Jiren wasn't an antagonist. Yes, he was. An antagonist is someone that serves to stand in the way, obstruct, or otherwise antagonize our point of view characters. He isn't a villain, that is true, but that is also fundamentally different to an antagonist. An antagonist, which Jiren is supposed to be in this. Aside from that, this arc suffers from a lot of issues, not the least of which being its length. With so many fights involved, this is a slog to get through. I mean, I don't think anyone thought Tien was going to win this tournament, and waiting for him to get eliminated was a slog if ever I did see one. Not to mention a terrible episode and elimination that he ultimately received in the end. With that said, however, when an episode hits, it absolutely annihilated. I think if I made a list of my top 20 favorite Dragon Ball Super episodes, 18 or 19 of them would come straight from this very long arc, with my number one favorite episode being episode 131. Handled by the now household name of Megumi Ishitani, who would later go on to do amazing things with One Piece, episode 131 of Super is breathtaking in all of the best ways, both narratively and visually, thanks to the likes of Yuya Takahashi, contributing one of the coolest moments in the series through Frieza and Goku's team up. Despite Frieza's recruitment early on being amazing and major story beats in the plot being solid, the arc itself has a lot of padding, moves at glacial pace, and Jiren sucks beyond belief. Vegeta repeats character moments he had in Z time and again, and overall, there are great moments but equally disappointing ones and flaccid moments to boot. I think due to that, I'll give this one a B tier too, but top of B tier. Better than Goku Black in my opinion. And to be honest, I think if we cut this arc down by maybe 35%, this arc would get a much better ranking in this list. The Moro arc. If I'm being perfectly honest, I wasn't sure if I should even include the Moro arc from the manga, as the manga itself feels like an entirely different story for a multitude of reasons. I mean, the universe survival arc is so different from the anime in the manga that I'd put the manga version of the events into D tier if I could. So that will tell you just how different these two versions of the story really are. With that said, however, I do want to include this as it is part of the ongoing Dragon Ball story and it is an arc. I felt weird about the Moro arc, however, while I was reading it month to month. Because of the way the manga is laid out and the way the action doesn't really do anything, when you're caught waiting for a particular fight to end for 3 months at a time, you tend to lose interest really fast and almost forget certain plot beats. However, for a binging experience with this arc being completely done and being able to read it from start to finish in one go, this arc was a lot of fun, offered Vegeta a nice piece of character development, which is more than I can say for pretty much all of Dragon Ball Super, and we got to go back to Namek for a bit, which is always good. Again, like the other parts of this video, I wrote a full review of this arc a couple of years back when it concluded, and to be honest, it holds up really well. It's not as good as the 22nd Tenkaichi Budokai, but it is worthy of being an A tier entry, I think, at least for now. Maybe below or around the Buu arc. And that should do it. I'm not going to cover the Granola arc seeing as it hasn't finished yet, and I'm not caught up on it either. I do plan on reviewing it someday soon though, it's just got to end first. But yeah, that's my tier list. Let me know how stupid or wrong you think I am in the comments down below, and don't forget to scream at me on Twitter. If I don't get at least 50 people screaming at me in my mentions, I sometimes worry that Twitter has gone down or broke or something. I love you all, One Piece review next week, and then the world. I've been Toy Nut Mark, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next week.